One of the biggest mistakes I've made in fantasy football for years now is always chasing the bounce back running back, always thinking that he was once good. I mean, his rookie season was phenomenal. He's going to get back there. I'm coming up with excuses for these guys. I'm coming up with the reasons why maybe they failed this past year. And a lot of times, the quote unquote bounce back running back is just on a trend where he's getting worse and worse and worse. So I want to go through and try to identify which bounce back candidates are worth drafting and which guys may just not be good at football. Now, starting off with our first player, Naji Harris is a running back that I have drafted a lot this season. And the more and more research I do into Naji Harris, I get scared. Now, of course, I want to say why I've been drafting him. I want to go through and highlight the quote unquote excuses that I'm making for Naji Harris this past season and why I think Naji Harris could be better going into 2023. First one being is that Naji Harris went into the season this past year injured. I mean, if y'all remember in the preseason, it was popping up everywhere. People are going, okay, is Naji Harris going to go on the PUP? Is Naji Harris going to be able to play? And he started. Naji Harris is a straight up trooper. Naji Harris does not miss football games. Now, the second reason being is if you remember what you had last season with the quarterback play in Pittsburgh, you had Mitchell Trubisky to start the year, and then you had Kenny Pickett, a rookie quarterback, to come in halfway through. So naturally, if you have horrendous quarterback play, it's going to be difficult to produce if you're a running back. Lastly, it was a very bad offensive line for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I think you can make a strong argument that with the additions they've made this offseason, the offensive line should be improved this next year. The quarterback play should be dramatically improved as well, and Naji Harris should be healthy. So those are the excuses that I'm making for Naji Harris, because Naji Harris was definitely way worse this past season than he was as a rookie. I mean, he went from being the running back 9 from a points per game basis in 2021 down to the running back 20 from a points per game basis in 2022. He fell from about 98 total yards per game down to about 74. His market share numbers, both as a rusher as well as a receiver, got worse alongside him. And with Naji, I wanted to go through and see how this has panned out through history dating back to the year 2000. Now, I didn't want to include running backs that had similar type seasons that were at the end of their career, because we know once running backs turn 27, turn 28, turn 29, these guys are going to fall off, right? And they're, of course, just going to keep going down. But instead, I wanted to look at only the running backs that were young-ish. So what we did is we looked at all running back seasons starting at the age 25 that comped similar to what you had with Naji Harris in 2021. And then the following year where you saw that decline, they were 26 years old or younger. So we put in his receiving yards per game. We put in his rushing yards per game. We put in his age, his fantasy points per game, and we adjusted the slider by 20% for better or worse on the RotoViz screener. Now, these are the running backs that comp back historically to having the same type of 2-year decline as Naji Harris. You had James Robinson, you had Peyton Hillis, you had CJ Spiller, you had Ezekiel Elliott, you had CJ Anderson, and you had Marion Barber. Now, I wanted to then see, after they had that declining season, what did they do the following year? How many of these running backs that look similar to Naji Harris actually managed to bounce back? Now, CJ Spiller in 2014 did not bounce back. CJ Spiller, massive fall down. James Robinson in 2022, massive fall. Hell, he couldn't even stay on his same team. Peyton Hillis in 2012, big time fall. Ezekiel Elliott, 2022, small fall. I mean, he was just in that continued trend where it's down, of course. CJ Anderson in 2016, a little bit of a small fall and nothing massive. And Marion Barber in 2010, massive, massive fall. So if we look historically, the data tells us that Naji Harris shouldn't really be a candidate for a quote-unquote bounce back. And this is a little painful because, like I've said, I've drafted a decent amount of Naji Harris because at the 3-4 turn, I think that his price is pretty reasonable. Now, what I'm probably going to be doing as this data screams that we shouldn't be betting on that bounce back is I'll probably pivot to another running back in that range that I actually like. I think we're probably going to pivot over to Travis Etienne Now, if you're going over to Underdog drafts right now, Naji Harris currently is the running back 13. He has an ADP of 38, so he's going at the beginning of the 4th round. Whereas Travis Etienne's the running back 14 with an ADP of 41, so Travis Etienne's more so going in the middle of the 4th round. If you're going to compare this to ESPN drafts, ESPN there has Travis Etienne at pick 25. So Etienne's going 16 picks higher on ESPN, and Naji Harris is picked 36. So he's about the same on ESPN as well as in Underdog drafts. So yeah, I'd say if you're drafting in Underdog drafts, probably want to be going Travis Etienne in round 4 instead. And this is coming from someone who's drafted a considerable amount of both Naji Harris as well as Travis Etienne. Now, if we're going to go ahead and pull up the player props and what you have with Underdog Fantasy, they have Travis Etienne at 6 rushing touchdowns as well as 950 rushing yards. And they have Naji Harris at 6.5 rushing touchdowns, 925.5 rushing yards. So, I mean, they are very similar backs, but we just haven't had that slip in Travis Etienne's play, right? It's not like Travis Etienne's getting worse, and it looks like that's possibly the case with Naji, even if we want to make excuses on why it may have been. Now, going over to a running back that I have drafted so freaking much of, I am betting on a massive Jonathan Taylor bounce back. Now, Taylor 2021, obviously, the running back 2 from a points per game basis, averaged 130 total yards per game. He averaged 19.5 carries per game, averaged 3 targets per game. In 2022, this went significantly down based on 1, the offense being trash, 2, Jonathan Taylor getting hurt himself. But what's very impressive about this Taylor profile is while the overall numbers went down when he went from being the running back 2 from a per game basis down to the running back 18, the market share numbers improved. He went up from 66 to 67% of his team's carries on a per game basis, and he went up from about 9.8 to 10.2% of his team's target share on a per game basis. Now, looking through to see the running backs that historically have seen the same kind of decline through history going back to the year 2000, keep in mind, all these guys, that starting season has to be before 25 years old. That way we can just be looking at these younger options. We don't want to be looking at running backs at the very end of their career. You had Clinton Portis, who bounced back in 2005 to crush. You had Dalvin Cook in 2022, who continued on that decline. Obviously, Dalvin Cook was much older than Jonathan Taylor at that point. You had Travis Henry, who had a big fall, but you also had 2012 Adrian Peterson, who bounced back to average 131 yards per game. So unlike Naji Harris, you do have a couple running backs on this list similar to Jonathan Taylor that were able to see that massive bounce back, that were able to be a league winner for you. And if we go over and look at where Jonathan Taylor is projected right now, Underdog has him at 1,200 rushing yards, 8.5 rushing touchdowns. Unless I'm mistaken, I think this is actually the second highest mark of all running backs on Underdog, only behind Derrick Henry. Hell, they have Joe Mixon at 800 rushing yards. They have Jonathan Taylor at 1,200. If you're looking at where he's getting drafted right now on Underdog, Jonathan Taylor's the running back 5 with an ADP of 17. If you're looking at where he's getting drafted in ESPN drafts, there Jonathan Taylor is actually going at pick 13. So regardless, I think it's a pretty strong value in both of those formats. And I think those Underdog player props actually back us up with those projections. But of course, real quick, if you want to check out any of those player props, or if you want to get into a draft with us, you know, we are drafting every single day on the live stream. You can find the link to Underdog Fantasy, which is where we are drafting, in the comment section in the description. That's the same place as those player props. It's best ball, so there's no time commitment at all during the year. That's how I drafted 700 teams and won $150,000 last season. And if you sign up with promo code FLOCK, they're going to match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to $100. Plus, you're going to get our 2023 fantasy football rankings and a free trial to flockfantasy.com. Please make sure to go sign up, support the channel, and hop into some drafts with us. But now going over to our next guy, we're going to be looking at DeAndre Swift. Swift fell from the running back 10 in 2021 down to the running back 16. Obviously, situation entirely different this next year, right? Now, if you're looking at Swift, more importantly, you're seeing the usage fall from a market share perspective in both his carries per game as well as his target share in this offense, where he goes from about 46% to 25%, and he goes from about 17.5% down to about 14.5%. Now, there aren't too many running backs that comp similarly to DeAndre Swift since the year 2000. 2000. You had Tevin Coleman in 2018. Tevin Coleman actually had a massive bounce back this season. You had Giovanni Bernard 2015. Gio kind of stayed the same. I mean, you never saw some wild swings with him like you did Tevin Coleman. And you had Mwelde Moore, who had a big fall off. I apologize if I mispronounced that name. But regardless, with Swift, it's very difficult to sit here and make a strong bet based off just the historical data that we have, especially as you're looking at the situation just be wildly different than what you had in years past. I think you have a reason to be bullish on Swift, given the fact that this is a running back that now is in a much better offense that has access to a ton of rushing upside in terms of rushing touchdowns in particular. But I think you also have a reason to be a little bit worried in that if you're looking at DeAndre Swift, what you want to bet on is his receiving down volume. That's what DeAndre Swift has crushed with for the first 3 years of his NFL career. And now going over to an offense where the quarterback's going to run the ball. Generally, those quarterbacks that can run, they don't want to check the ball down. They're not looking to dump the ball off to the running back out the backfield. Now, if we're looking at where he's being drafted in underdog drafts in comparison to ESPN drafts right now, DeAndre Swift in underdog drafts is currently going as the running back 23. He has an ADP of 78. Whereas if you're looking at DeAndre Swift in ESPN drafts, you're seeing DeAndre Swift go as the running back 25 with an ADP of 78. So honestly, and maybe a better spot to take DeAndre Swift in those ESPN drafts if you're getting him at a slightly cheaper cost. Because keep in mind, underdog's going to be half PPR. And if you're playing in a full PPR and getting him at a cheaper cost, just kind of a no-brainer. I mean, if we're going to be looking at his player prop here, they have DeAndre Swift at 567.5 rushing yards, and they have DeAndre Swift at 4.5 rushing touchdowns on underdog. Now, going over to our next guy, we're going to be looking at Antonio Gibson, who fell down from the running back 19 to the running back 28. This was primarily given the addition of Brian Robinson. Brian Robinson came in and obviously saw a massive workload on first and second down, causing Antonio Gibson to fall from about 16 carries per game down to about 10 this past season. But the departure of J.D. McKissic actually led Antonio Gibson to have a slightly larger role as a pass catcher, where he went from 3.25 targets per game up to almost 4 targets per game this past year. So you're seeing Gibson turn into more so a passing down running back, someone that you're going to be more interested in a full PPR league. And if we go through and look at these guys historically, Kenyon Drake saw the similar fall off. And in the following season, 2019, you had a massive breakout for Kenyon Drake. TJ Yeldon continued to fall down. Trent Richardson, it was actually his last year in the league in 2014. Mike Tolbert, he completely fell off. And then Michael Bennett, he kind of stayed as nothing, right? So, I mean, if we're looking at this, I think what you're kind of hoping for with Antonio Gibson is maybe the departure of J.D. McKissic just expands his role overall as a pass catcher. And I think you're hoping you see a ceiling similar to Kenyon Drake. But keep in mind, Kenyon Drake going over to Arizona was crazy as he was just used as a straight up bell cow the last 4 to 5 weeks. If you were ever to see Antonio Gibson used as a bell cow, you would need an injury to Brian Robinson. Now, going over to our next back. Very difficult to sit here and say that unless his situation changes, Elijah Mitchell is probably not having a big bounce back, right? I mean, you have CMC in front of him, but definitely the perfect guy to look at on a list like this because you're seeing Elijah Mitchell go from 100 total yards per game as a rookie down to 57 total yards per game as a second-year player. You're seeing Elijah Mitchell fall from the running back 15 to the running back 44. Now, obviously, he got injured, and most importantly, Christian McCaffrey came in. CMC will be there this next season as well. But nonetheless, even with Christian McCaffrey there, Elijah Mitchell still has a role in this offense. I mean, if you're going to go over and look at where Underdog is projecting Elijah Mitchell for this next season, they have him almost at 600 rushing yards. Yes, 600 rushing yards. They have Christian McCaffrey at about 865. So they're still projecting this to be a running back backfield that's kind of split. Obviously, CMC is the guy you want given his receiving down skill set. But if we go through and look for some examples of this historically, 2016, Jeremy Hill had a small bounce back. Doug Martin, 2015, actually had a big time bounce back. Jonathan Stewart continued to fall down. So obviously, what you would need is an injury to Christian McCaffrey, which we've seen time and time again. And if that were to happen, I think Elijah Mitchell can turn into a league winner. Now, of course, if we're looking at where he's being drafted, Elijah Mitchell is going as the running back 44 when it comes to ESPN drafts. On Underdog, Elijah Mitchell's going as the running back 41. Underdog, he has an ADP of 123. ESPN, he has an ADP of 159. And I think that he is a great pick in both formats. Because if you're taking Elijah Mitchell in Underdog best ball drafts, if he randomly has a big run, if he randomly scores a touchdown, then he can spike into your starting lineup when you weren't expecting. But in your traditional redraft league, I don't mind at all taking Elijah Mitchell in the last round or two, just saying, what if CMC gets injured at the beginning of this season? Because if you're looking at the other running backs that are going directly behind him, you have Tyler Algier, Damian Harris, Ezekiel Elliott, Chuba Hubbard, Deonta Foreman, Devon Achane. So you're kind of looking at those handcuff type backs. And I would probably classify Elijah Mitchell as one of the most premium handcuff running backs in the NFL with a true league-winning potential if something were to occur to CMC. But I think that's all I have for y'all in this video. Again, thank you so much for checking it out. If you enjoyed it, go down there, drop a like, subscribe to the channel if you play fantasy football. And of course, if you want to get into a draft with us, which you're doing every single night on the live stream, or if you want to go check out any of those player props, you can find the link to Underdog Fantasy in the description as well as the comment section. If you use promo code FLOCK, they're going to match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to $100. Plus, you're going to get my 2023 fantasy football rankings, a free trial to flockfantasy.com. It's available in damn near every state. You can see the map here. But again, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Really do appreciate you and really hope I get to see you in the live stream tonight.